Gallant Old Engine by the Reverend W. Audrey. Read and adapted by Joshua Boston. Special Funnel. It was winter time on the island of Sodor. Peter Sam puffed nervously along the line. His funnel had never been the same since his accident with the slate cars. Now the biting, cold winter wind tugged at it, trying to blow it away as he puffed up and down the line.
"My funnel feels wobbly," he complained. "I wish Mr. Percival and Sir Topham Hatt would hurry up with my new one. They say it will be something special."
"You and your special funnel," laughed the other engines. They were all fond of Peter Sam, but he talked about his special funnel so much that it had become quite a joke. The winter weather worried Mr. Hugh. The wind grew worse and broke away branches from trees. The rain came too and turned hillside streams into raging torrents, which threatened to wash the line away. Mr. Hugh and the men patrolled the line every day with Rusty, the little diesel. He worked hard every day, carrying them up and down the line. They removed branches and leaves and cleared culverts so that the water could flow away. But one day, they found bad trouble. A fresh torrent had broken out, and Mr. Hugh had to stop all trains. "There's been a washout by the tunnel," said Rusty's driver. "The track bed has been swept away. We must repair the damage immediately." The men worked hard and repaired the damage in a week. While they worked, the weather changed. It became frosty and much colder. They finished just in time for market day, and Peter Sam took the morning train very carefully over the mended piece of line. Soon he approached the tunnel. It was short and curved, so his driver could not see through it. Peter Sam was heading for trouble. "There's something hanging from the roof," shouted his driver. He braked, and there was a clanging crash. When Peter Sam and the coaches came out into the open air, he was a very different-looking engine. He no longer had his funnel. The conductor found the funnel and something else. "Here's what hit you, Peter Sam," he called, and produced a cold, thick icicle. They set off again, but without his funnel, the journey was very difficult. The passengers grumbled dreadfully at the smoke. Then the fireman saw an old drain pipe lying beside the track. "We'll use that instead of your funnel. At least it'll help control the smoke." They wired it on top of Peter Sam's smoke box and boiler, and he finished his journey with the drain pipe. The other engines laughed when Peter Sam came home, and Sir Handel sang a song about it. "Peter Sam said again and again, his new funnel will put us to shame. But went into the tunnel and lost his old funnel. Now his famous new funnel's a drain." Ha! The teasing continued until the day his new funnel finally arrived. Sir Topham Hatt and Mr. Percival proudly presented it.
"Oh dear, someone squashed it,"
said Peter Sam, but Sir Topham Hatt laughed. "Don't worry, Peter Sam. This new funnel is something special indeed. You'll soon see." "It's called a diesel ejector," explained Mr. Percival. "The most up-to-date funnel there is. Listen, when you puff, you draw air through your fire to make it burn brightly. With your old funnel, puffing is hard work. It uses strength that you need for pulling trains. This new funnel had special pipes, which help the air come easy. Puffing will be much easier, so you will have more strength for your work."
"Yes, sir,"
said Peter Sam doubtfully. At first, Peter Sam's special funnel was a great joke. Sir Handel and Duncan asked him why he sat on it, and then who should be laughed at. But when Peter Sam started work, it was a very different story.
"I feel stronger than ever before,"
he hummed. Even Sir Handel was impressed. "I can't understand it. Peter Sam just strolls along the line with any train he's given. He just chuffs and puffs, and he never seems to work hard. yet he makes it look so easy. The other engines don't laugh at Peter Sam's funnel now. They wish they had one just like it. Steamroller. Sir Handel kept slipping between the rails, so they gave him new wheels with broad tires. He became very proud of these new wheels because they held well to the rails, but they were unusual. The other engines laughed and teased him. "Look at his steamroller wheels," they said. "You shut up," snorted Sir Handel. "You're all just jealous."
"Don't worry,"
soothed Peter Sam.
"You and the other engines teased me about my special funnel until you found out how useful it is."
"Did you hear that?" puffed Sir Handel. "My wheels are special, just like Peter Sam's funnel. Now I'll go faster than any of you." The engines were surprised. Sir Handel's trains were usually late. Skarloey winked to the other engines. He had a plan to try and make Sir Handel see sense. "With your brand new wheels, Sir Handel," he said gravely, "you are just the engine to tackle George." "Who's George?" "That steamroller over there," replied Skarloey. While Sir Handel was still in the shed waiting for his new wheels, workmen had come to widen the road which ran for about a mile or two beside the railway. They had pulled down the wall, and nothing now protected the line. George was their steamroller. He chuffered to and fro, making rude remarks to the engines whenever they passed, and even when they were idling in the yards. "Railways are no good. Turn them into roads. Pull them up. Turn them into roads. Railways are no good. Turn them into roads. Pull them up. Turn them into roads." Skarloey had often heard that talk before, and he warned the others to take no notice. But he hoped that when the two boastful engines met, he and the others would have some fun. "Don't worry," said Sir Handel importantly when they told him about George. "Leave him to me. I'll soon send him packing. George will soon get a run for his money." Next morning, George was standing near the halt by the level crossing. "Huh," he said. "You're Sir Handel, I suppose." Sir Handel was standing no nonsense. "And you, I suppose, are George?" "Yes, I've heard of you." "And I've heard of you. You swank around with your steamroller wheels, pretending you're as good as me." "Actually," said Sir Handel sweetly, "I'm better. Goodbye." And he puffed away. George chuffered on, fuming. Later that afternoon, Sir Handel had to bring a special load down after the last train had gone. When he reached the road, he saw George trundling home. Sir Handel tried to attract his attention. "Peep, peep, peep, peep." George took no notice. He trundled along close to the track. There was barely room to pass. "Peep, peep, 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 peep." Sir Handel was cross. He slowed and cautiously crept alongside. "Get out of my way, you great clumsy road hog," he hissed. "Huh, I'll move for imitation steamrollers," retorted George with spirit. "You don't own the road. Get out of my way." They lumbered along side by side, exchanging insults. Then there was trouble. No one could ever explain what happened. George's driver says he signaled for Sir Handel to stop. Sir Handel's driver says he signaled to George. Anyway, there was a crash. The brake van tilted sideways, and the conductor scrambled out to find George's front roller nuzzling his footboard. "Ah!" cried Sir Handel. "That's what it's your fault." "No, it wasn't. It was yours." Everyone was hotly arguing about whose fault it was. "Hello, hello, hello," said a policeman ominously. "And what's going on here?" This made everyone stop the arguing before it turned into fisticuffs. And when Sir Handel's firemen came with Rusty and Mr. Hugh, they all set to work cleaning up the mess instead. Neither engine had been going fast enough to cause much damage, so Sir Handel was able to bring his train on when George had backed himself away. The next day, The workmen put up a fence between road and rail and then went away, taking George with them. This was because they had finished their work. But Sir Handel thought that he had made George go away. He was more conceited than ever and talked everlastingly about steamrollers. "Oh dear," whispered Skarloey that evening. "He's worse than ever. I'm sorry my plan was no good." "Never mind," said Rusty. "We'll think of something else." But they had no need to do that, for some boys came and asked Mr. Hugh if they could look at the engines. Almost at once, one of them called out, "Look, here's Sir Handel. He raced a steamroller yesterday, but the steamroller nearly beat him. It was most exciting." Sir Handel never mentions steamrollers now. Passengers and polish. Nancy is a conductor's daughter. One day she was working on Skarloey with some polish and a rag. Skarloey was snoozing happily, but Nancy wanted to talk.
"Wake up, lazy bones,"
she said severely.
"Your brass is filthy. Aren't you ashamed?"
"No," yawned Skarloey sleepily. "You're just an old fusspot. Go away." And Skarloey closed his eyes. He was thinking about his friend Rheneas and all the good times they had shared before Rheneas had went away to be mended. Nancy tickled Skarloey's nose and interrupted again.
"Don't you want to look nice when Rheneas comes back?"
Skarloey wasn't sleepy anymore. He woke up suddenly. "What? When?"
"Tomorrow. Daddy told me. I'm going now."
"Nancy, stop! Do I really look nice? Please polish me again. That's a kind, good little girl."
"Now who's the old fusspot?"
laughed Nancy and set to work once more. She gave Skarloey another rub, then climbed down. Duncan was nearby, and he was jealous. "Aren't you going to polish me too?"
"Sorry, not today. I'm going now. I'm helping the refreshment lady this afternoon. We must get the ice cream and things ready for the passengers on Skarloey's 2 o'clock train. Never mind, Duncan. I'll give you a good polish tomorrow."
But Duncan did mind. "It isn't fair," he complained. "Peter Sam gets a special funnel, Sir Handel gets special wheels, passengers get ice cream, but I'm never even polished." Of course, this wasn't true, but Duncan liked having a grievance and enjoyed complaining. He began to sulk. That afternoon, a message bearing bad news came from the station by the waterfall. "One of Skarloey's coaches has come off the rails. Please send some workmen to put it right." Duncan was in the steed, so he had to go. "All this extra work," he grumbled. "It wears an engine out." "Rubbish," said his driver. "Come on." The derailed coach was in the middle of Skarloey's train, so he had gone on to the top station with his front coaches. Duncan shunted the works train into the sidings and left the workmen to sort out the mess. Then he brought the passengers in the rear coaches home. He sulked all the way. He arrived back just in time for his own 4 o'clock train. "I get no rest, I get no rest," he muttered. He was sulky and short of steam, so his driver waited a few minutes in the hope of raising more. But Duncan wouldn't try. "We can't keep the passengers waiting any longer," said his driver at last. Duncan was cross. "You always think about the passengers and never about me," he complained. "I'm not even polished, I'm overworked, and I won't stand it." It wasn't long before Duncan built up enough steam to set off, but he was still very grumpy and cross. He grumbled away, brooding over his wrongs. Duncan made the journey very difficult, but at last they reached the viaduct near the station. It is long, high, and narrow. No one can walk on it when a train is there. "Come on, Duncan," called his driver. "One more effort, and you'll have a drink and a rest at the station." Then Duncan was very rude. "Keep your old station. I'm staying here." And he did, too. He stopped his train right on the viaduct and nothing his driver or fireman could do would make him move another yard. Skarloey had to come from the top station and haul Duncan and his train all the way to the platform. The passengers were furious. They burst out of the train and told the drivers, firemen, and the conductor what a bad railway it was. Skarloey had to pull the train all the way to the top station, too. Duncan wouldn't even try. Mr. Percival was waiting at the shed for Duncan that evening. He spoke to him severely. "No passengers means no polish, and no polish means no passengers," muttered Duncan to himself in an obstinate sort of voice. "He still has a lot to learn, doesn't he?" Gallant Old Engine. Duncan would not stop grumbling. He grumbled that he wasn't polished enough. He grumbled that he was overworked. Most of all, he grumbled about the passengers. "I'm ashamed of you, Duncan," said Skarloey. "You should think about your passengers." "Passengers are just nuisances. They're always complaining." Skarloey was shocked. "That's no way to talk," he said. "Passengers are coal and water. No passengers means no trains. No trains means no railway. And we'd be on the scrap heap, my engine, and don't you forget it. Thank goodness Rheneas is coming home tomorrow. Perhaps he will teach you sense before it's too late." "What has Rheneas got to do with it?" "Rheneas saved our railway."
Please tell us about it,
said Peter Sam. "Well," said the old engine, "the year before you and Sir Handel came, things were very bad. We were on our last wheels. Mr. Hugh was driver and fireman, while Mr. Peter Sam, the former thin controller, was conductor. He and Mr. Percival did everything else too, and both helped Mr. Hugh mend us in the shed. We expect 2 fresh new engines next year, they told us, but we must keep the trains going now. If we don't, our railway will close."
How awful,
said Peter Sam in sympathy. "I tried my best," continued Skarloey, "though I couldn't do much. My old wheels ached. But Rheneas understood. 'It's my turn now,' he said. 'You've done more than your fair share of hard work.' He was often short of steam, but he always tried hard to struggle to a station and rest there. 'I mustn't stop in between stations,' he would say. 'The passengers wouldn't like it.' That," said Skarloey earnestly, "is most important." "Pshaw!" huffed Duncan. He had stopped on the viaduct and hadn't cared at all. "Passengers," continued Skarloey, "don't mind stopping at stations. They can get out and walk about. That's what stations are for. But they get cross if you stop at the wrong places like viaducts. Then they say we're a bad railway and never come back." "I remember Rheneas stopping in a wrong place once," said Skarloey, "and this is what happened. Of course, he couldn't help it, but he made up for it afterwards. On that windy afternoon, he was travelling home and had damp rails and a full train. There were even passengers in Beatrice, the conductor's van. It wasn't a comfortable ride at all. His old wheels slipped dreadfully on the steep bit after the first station, but they gripped at last. The worst is over now, he thought. Now what away. But they weren't. "Ah! Oh, I've got a cramp!" he groaned. He stopped, unable to move, on the loneliest part of the line. Mr. Percival, who had then taken up the thin controller title, and Mr. Hugh examined him carefully. The passengers watched and waited. Rheneas eyed them anxiously. They looked cross. At last Mr. Percival stood up. "Your valve gill has jammed on one side," he said. "We've unfastened the rods and tied them up. Now, Rheneas," he went on, "we need to reach the next station. Can you pull us there on one cylinder?" "I'll try, sir, but the next station isn't the right station. Will the passengers be cross?" "Don't worry," smiled Mr. Percival. "They know we can't reach the top station today." So Mr. Percival stood out in front and sanded the rails. Passengers from Beatrice pushed from behind. Mr. Hugh gently eased out the regulator. The train jerked forward and began to move. Rheneas did his best. "I'll do it! I'll do it!" he panted breathlessly. Everyone cheered, but Rheneas heard nothing. "Mr. Percival is relying on me. If I fail, then passengers will be cross and the railway will close. It mustn't, it mustn't, it mustn't. I will get there or burst." Everything blurred. He was really too tired to make another turn of his wheels or move another yard. But he did, and another, and another, and another. Finally, tired but triumphant, Rheneas reached the station. "I'm here at last," he wheezed, and sighed with relief. "It's proud of you I am indeed," said Mr. Hugh. All Rheneas could remember from the journey going down was having to go on going on. "Thank you for getting us home," said the passengers. "We expected a long walk, but you brought us here. We'll tell all our friends what a fine railway this is and come back with them." Mr. Percival was delighted. "You're a gallant little old engine," he said. "When you're rested, we'll mend you ready for tomorrow."
Was Rheneas always ready for tomorrow?
asked Peter Sam. "Always," smiled the old engine. "Whatever happened, Rheneas always pulled his trains." It was Duncan who broke the silence. "Thanks for telling us about him," he said. "I was wrong. Passengers are important after all." All the engines were on the wharf the next day when Rheneas came home. Some of Sir Topham Hatt's engines were there too. Edward pushed his flatbed into a siding, and Skarloey pulled Rheneas neatly to his own rails. This was the signal for a chorus of whistles from engines large and small. You had never heard such a noise in all your life. The owner, Rheneas, and other important people made speeches, a band played, and everyone was very happy. But Rheneas was happiest of all in his own place that night next to his friend Skarloey. With a smile, Rheneas whispered,
"This helps the little engine to feel that, at last, he has really come home."